necessary to get that information without the need for further development. So we'll discuss more about that. So first, we'll look at our website and we'll kind of show you how to go through. And I'm sure you're probably all aware of doing this or familiar with this. There could be other ways that you go into it, but this is one way using the Internet Explorer of going through. So this is opm.gov/retirement services. Put your cursor over retirement, click on it. Drop-down menu will appear, and then you can click on Benefits Officers Center. Once you're on that main page, you will have access to many websites for information and notification. And what I want to show you here is how to get to the BALs. You can click on the Benefits Administration Letters tab. And you can click on BAL 19-105. That's the information for agencies to improve survivor claim processing upon the death of a federal employee. As I said, I'm sure that you're probably already aware of that. You're already familiar with doing that. And on a side note, that does supersede BAL 09-102. Some of the information might be similar, but this supersedes that other BAL. Okay. Some of the things that we will do there with respect to the retirement, we'll check the SF50s. We need you to check the SF50s. Look for what type of service it is. Is it CSRS covered? Is it FERS covered? Offset? Is it FICA? Is there FICA time that can be paid back? Make sure what retirement system the deceased should be covered under. There's a FERCA error, and it lasted more than 3 years after 12/31 of 1996. And there could be a FERCA there, the Federal Erroneous Coverage Correction Act. If so, then follow those rules to counsel the survivor. Is there a FERS election coverage form? Is there any special calculation, such as a law enforcement, firefighter, an air traffic controller? Per BAL 10-105, we need a certification of that service included with the package. No matter how much time there is, there would be that special calculation given for that. So we need that certification. There is no length of service required for that special calculation on the death of an employee, so we would need that. Also, was the deceased a reemployed annuitant at death? If so, was OPM notified of that reemployed service? If yes, note this on the summary of service. There are many times that we're not even notified of that until the death IRR comes through. And when that gets associated with that previous retirement claim, that's our first known knowledge of that person even returning to the federal workforce. So if there's a survivor annuity, then there might need to be another calculation done. So, check that to make sure that there isn't any additional service that we would not even know about. Okay. Remove all designations from the OPF. Make copies to place back in the OPF. Please send all the designations for retirements that are in the OPF to OPM with that package. CSRS designation of beneficiary forms, or those 2808s, are not valid unless they're received and certified by OPM prior to the employee's death. So we should already have those. Those should have been sent to us whenever they were submitted to the agency. So you probably won't find those, but 102s probably would still be in that OPF. For the military, if the post-50 if the post-56 military deposit was not paid, or if it was partially paid and there's a surviving spouse, that spouse has the opportunity to make or complete the military deposit. So we need whatever information you have about that. If the long copy of the DD-214 is in the OPF that shows the character of the service and any lost time, then make a copy of that and include that with the package. If there isn't one, then request a copy of that from the survivor. We'll need that in order to process the claim. If the deceased was retired military and the deceased elected a military survivor benefit pay, or SBP, for their surviving spouse, then the spouse cannot waive the military SBP. If the post-56 military deposit is paid, OPM will calculate the survivor annuity using the military and offset the SERS and FERS survivor benefit by the amount of the SBP. Okay, so we will need to know that. If the surviving spouse is unsure if he or she is eligible for the SBP, then we will need the RI 25-45 form, the verification of military retired pay status for survivors of deceased federal employees completed. We'll need that response so that we can finalize the case. Under SERS, if there's military involved, the survivor would need to contact Social Security to determine if there's any effect to their Social Security whenever they make a decision whether to credit or exclude the military. And here are some contact information that they would have for either you or for the survivors: military retired pay number or the Social Security number and website. And I'm sure you already have this information. To make the military deposit, the surviving spouse or former spouse needs to complete the forms and submit the same documentation to payroll as the employee. When they make their payment, they need to write the Social Security number of the employee on the check to make sure it gets credited correctly. Once received, payroll will create an IRR, an individual retirement record, for the military deposit, and then they send it to our office. A surviving spouse is not eligible to make installments like the employee was. The entire amount needs to be paid in one payment. If a partial payment was made prior to death and the survivor does not want to complete the deposit, the survivor can request OPM refund the partial payment. Keep in mind, though, the refund will be made in the deceased federal order of precedence. So if there's a designation of beneficiary and it doesn't name the spouse, then that surviving spouse would not be the person to receive it. The IRR for the completed military deposit needs to be sent to OPM from payroll as soon as it's paid in full. And we have to have that before we can finalize the case with credit for the military. Okay, there's also issues with the health benefits. We need to know what health insurance the deceased had at death. Remember, a deceased employee does not need to meet that 5-year requirement for the survivors to be eligible to continue with the health insurance. If it's self-only coverage, you as the employing agency will need to terminate that coverage. You would mail copy 1 to the nearest relative, copy 2 to the carrier, include copy 3 in the death package to OPM, file copy 4 in the OPF. If the employee never had HB, then you could just leave the forms in the OPF, and perhaps those forms declining coverage are in the OPF. You know, we wouldn't need them if they didn't have health benefits at the time of death. Make sure OPM is notified of all the individuals that should be covered. And keep in mind that grandchildren are considered foster children, and the foster child form needs to be completed. So if there's self+1, both the agency and OPM need to know who the +1 is. If the +1's a child over 22, then they might not be eligible to continue the coverage because someone must be receiving a survivor benefit to continue the health benefits. For FERS, if there's only one minor child eligible to continue the health benefits, it would be helpful if the child's parent or guardian completed page 6, section 3 of the Parent Form 3104B. then they can be set up for direct pay if necessary. And that direct pay would be to the National Finance Center. Self and family, is there someone eligible to continue the health insurance? We would need the names of all individuals needing coverage if family, and if self plus one, we need to know who the plus one is. Is a surviving spouse also a federal employee? If so, do they want to pick up the health insurance on their own? Is there a former spouse? If so, is that former spouse eligible for the health insurance? Another thing to consider, once the SF-50 for death is prepared, sent to payroll, the health carriers are reconciling their files much quicker than in the past. So if they don't receive payment within 30 to 60 days, we're finding that they are sending notifications to the survivors that they're terminating their or canceling their health insurance. So it's happening much faster than it used to. So the sooner we can get everything taken care of and get the claims processed, the better, the less chance that there would be a termination of health insurance coverage. With respect to the unpaid compensation forms, please make sure that the TSP and unpaid compensation forms do not come to OPM. If received, we're going to return them to your office. We don't process anything with those, so we would just send them back to you. If the death is work-related, contact the Human Resource and or Workers' Compensation or OWCP point of contact if the person has not been previously notified. The CA5 application for survivor benefits for a widow, widower, and or children would need to be filed. The death gratuity form CA41 can be submitted by the survivor directly to OWCP to apply for the death gratuity. OWCP will reach out to the agency for a CA42 form. The CA40 beneficiary form should also be sent if there is one. And there is the website, dol.gov/OWCP/DFEC/deathgratuity.htm. You can find additional information in the CSRS and FERS handbook. If a claimant submits a claim to the agency should promptly forward that claim to OWCP so they can take care of it. And you can get these forms in the Department of Labor Forms Library. And earlier we did talk about, I mentioned the CSRS and FERS handbook does give additional information. One thing to keep in mind though, the handbook does state that contributions can be paid out if a person elects workers' comp in lieu of OPM benefits, which that is no longer correct. We will leave that, we will not pay out those contributions if a person elects workers' compensation. We leave that money in the fund because if that person ever loses entitlement to workers' compensation survivor benefits, then that gives them an opportunity to still receive a survivor benefit through OPM. And the CSRS and FERS handbook has not been updated to reflect that, but we've received guidance that we do not pay that out. So that part of the handbook has not been updated. I just wanted to get that out there so you knew that. OWCP has requested that this address should be used to apply for the death gratuity benefit. So this is an address for Cleveland, Ohio that you would use. And if the employee was on OWCP at the time of death and still on the agency rolls, the agency will still need to process the case for the individual as a deceased employee. So the 365 days, if the person was still in a non-pay status as an employee for 365 days, that person would still be considered an employee. If there's no CSI case, OPM will need to request copies of all the life insurance forms from the agency And if the agency no longer has that, then we would request the official personnel folder from NPRC. We would probably try to go first to the agency to get that. Of course, that does put a delay on us being able to certify that life insurance, but we have to get that before we can go any further. But usually OPM does certify the life insurance if the employee had 365 days of non-pay status, because a CSI case should have been created, or an insurance case that it basically has all the life insurance documents in there showing what the life insurance value was at that 365 days of non-pay status, and whatever types of coverage the person was eligible to have and what they elected to continue at that point. If the employee was on OWCP qualifying for a combined qualifying period totaling at least 2 months, then the agency is required to document this time if it is under Public Law 108-92 per BAL 04-105. And the reason is because the person didn't get to contribute to Social Security or savings plan while they were on leave without pay due to receipt of workers' compensation. So they get an extra calculation for that time. I would assume you probably have all had that already, but Public Law 108-2 does spell that out, that because they didn't get to contribute to those other places because they were on leave without pay because of workers' compensation, OPM will give them an enhanced calculation for that time. And our next slide here shows an example of what that looks like, what you should be putting on the summary of federal service whenever you send that to us. If you'll notice here, it will show that leave without pay due to OWCP because of Public Law 108-92. Okay, so some other steps that need to be taken with the death application package. Use the SF 2800A for SIRS or the SF 3104B for FERS. Those are the forms to note the forms and the dates you sent the survivor the information. You may also want to use this as a guide to see what forms and proofs are needed, depending on who and what benefits may be payable. You would establish a working folder and complete that employee death case summary, attachment 6 of the BAL, and place in the working folder. If the deposits for civilian or military service is applicable, then calculate the benefit to show the effect of making or not making those deposits, redeposits, military deposits. Go ahead and estimate what the benefit would be with and without that, so that the person, the survivor, has an idea of what the benefit would be with and without. And send out a condolence letter, and each agency probably has their own condolence letter, so whatever you use, that's fine. You would have yours. Include a copy of the summary of benefits checklist. That's attachment 2 of the benefits administration letter. It's a checklist for the survivors so they can verify what forms are included, what proofs they need to provide, and benefits for children. You need to check each block that applies, that they need to send in to us or send in to you so that you can send it to us. It also has phone numbers for the Office of Federal Employees Group Life Insurance, their savings plan, and it also has your contact information. It would also have the estimate of what their estimated survivor benefit would be. Also keep in touch with the survivor and try to set up an appointment to count them so that they have somebody that they can work with. Now, we do have quick pay types of notifications. You can fax that You can complete that quick pay and you can fax it to OPM. We do have two fax numbers there, the 1112 or the 1220 numbers. Or you can use the internet and you can complete it online and send it to OPM through that website. One note, only use the quick pay notification if there's a current spouse eligible for a survivor annuity and you're confident that you will be able to forward the completed death package within 60 days. Okay, it's not for all notifications of death. Again, there's the link that you would use. And to get the fact sheets you need, you would access BAL 19-105 just like we did before. And then you would go to attachment 5 of the BAL. And this form has been revised in May of 2014, and previous versions are not usable and they will be returned. The revised form was updated May 2014, and it does tell us down there. Okay. To report a death in service online, you can go to our website again, opm.gov/retirement services. Scroll down until you see report of death. Page also has the applications that would need to be completed. Scroll down until you see the report of the death of a federal employee. And this is going to take you to the beginning of the report. You can choose the retirement system. There's a drop down here that you would just click on CERS or PERS. And the fields marked in red are required fields. And these reports do get pulled off daily. So somebody will address these every day. This report has all the information needed to create the death claim, transfer in the health insurance, and put into interim pay status. And as we talked about before, this is only if there's a surviving spouse eligible for a survivor annuity. Do not enter if there's a child, a former spouse, or a designated beneficiary. If there's no surviving spouse payable, just send the package through the normal processes. Don't fax it or don't use the internet to report it to us. Okay. There's some more information that we have. We ask whatever information that's there, just go ahead and complete all the required fields. And once you get to the bottom, you'll want to print it before you submit the form. You will not get another opportunity to print it. So before you submit it, please print it out. When you click submit, the system will ask if you're sure. If everything's okay, you can click submit. If the report's successful, then you'll get this response that says your request has been submitted successfully. Okay. Then another action that you'll need to take is to prepare the SF-50. And once this action is done, it appears the health insurance carrier gets notified. And if they don't receive that payment, like we talked about before, they're terminating the health insurance. So that's must be one of the things that notifies the health insurance company and prompts them to start terminating people. So you'll want to make sure the survivors are aware and of that. And even though it's a difficult time for them, they need to get that paperwork back so that there's no lapse in their coverage. We don't want to see them lose their coverage. It's important to follow up if no response is received. The address may be incorrect. Maybe they didn't receive the forms if they moved. Sometimes people move right after the death of a loved one. Or they may be having difficulty completing the forms, or they are having trouble getting the proofs that are required. So maybe check in with them, find out if they need some help. Make copies of all documents for the OPF and forward the following to OPM. The preliminary information to OPM regarding the death of the employee and the SF-50 notice of personnel action. But that has to go through payroll. And don't send it directly to us, send it through payroll. And again, we talked about this before, but only CSRS and FERS documents would need to come to OPM, not the FEGLI information or the TSP or the unpaid compensation information. We would also need the SF-2800A or the 104B, all applicable documentation that goes with it, all DESIs, the 3102s, the FERS ones, all original SF-2809s and 2810s. Death certificates need to show the manner of death. We also have here marriage certificates or common law documents, acceptable court orders, birth certificates. We'll talk about common law marriage certificates and court orders here a little bit. Birth certificates, we would need those if there are children that are payable. We'll talk some more about development here. We'll do a brief overview of possible proofs that the surviving spouse would need to use for a deceased employee case. This information can be found on the RI Form 38-9. And the death certificate must show the date of death and the manner of death. Some states have a short form death certificate, which doesn't show the manner of death. Unfortunately, we need to know that. Homicides and accidental deaths can impact how we process the benefits. So we would need a death certificate, copy of contents of public record of death, certified by the custodian record, a statement as to the contents of the public record of death, certified by the custodian of the record, a statement of showing the date of death signed by the attending physician, an official of the institution where the death occurred, or the funeral director or their representative, or a copy of the coroner's report of death or verdict of the coroner's jury of the state or community where the death occurred, certified by the custodian of such records. Or when the death of the civilian occurred outside the United States and the body wasn't returned to the country, then a report of death by the U.S. consul or other agent of the State Department bearing his or her signature and official seal, or certified copy of the public record of death authenticated by a U.S. consul or other agent of the State Department bearing his or her signature and official seal. Okay. For proof of marriage, you can find that information on RI Form 38-86. We need the copy of the original certificate of marriage if available, or the rest of the other marriage does show on the Form RI 38-86. Here we go into the proof of common law marriage. The state that the common law marriage was in must recognize common law marriage. If the state's already determined the marriage existed, then send a copy of the court order or judgment. If there's not a court order or judgment, then notarized affidavits have to be sent in, described in items 1 and 2 here. Number 1 says affidavits from at least 2 persons knowing the facts concerning the common law relationship, preferably one from a member of the deceased employee's family and one from a non-family member. Also, in addition to that affidavit, the surviving spouse is also required to provide their own affidavit. We also require tax returns for the last 2 years. And there are other documents that are listed on the RI Form 38-86. And I'm reading a lot of this right off the page, but so much of this is exactly what we require, so that's why I'm reading it that way. For divorce decrees, this is a major delay with processing death claims. We commonly have to develop for divorce decrees and property settlements after the death package has been received in our office. A certified copy of the divorce decree and property settlement agreement is required for CSRS for any divorce that occurred after May 7th, 1985, and prefers it is required if the divorce occurred during federal employment. Okay, so keep in mind, we do need that information. If it's not provided with the package, then we're going to have to develop for that is going to hold up the packet or the processing of the benefits. Okay, so far now we've talked about everything that goes into the packet, whatever information we need, and everything that the agency is going to do, and it's going to be sent over to payroll. Now, once everything's sent to OPM, let's talk a little bit about what happens to the death claim, or what we do with it whenever we get that information. Okay. So, lack of providing this information delays the processing of survivor benefits. So that's one thing. If we don't have everything we need, then we will have to develop further, and that does put more time onto the overall processing of the claim. But let's talk a little bit about what we do from the point that we receive this information. Most notifications received by OPM are the death IRR loan, that individual retirement record, that payroll record, or the application of loan coming from human resources or from the survivor. We've seen a trend where we'll get that death payroll record coming in showing the deductions that the person had, their service history, but we don't have the application package from the human resources or from the survivor that's applying for the benefit. Or we'll get the application, but we don't have the death application or the death records because they're waiting on the application to come to payroll before they send everything to us. We have to have that complete package and all applicable documentation before we can do anything to process that death benefit. So ideally what should happen is that application package should go from the applicant to HR to payroll. Payroll will cut that final death IRR, that individual retirement record, and then send everything to us. Okay. And one of the big things that we've found that does happen, one of the consequences is the health benefits do terminate because that takes longer because we have one part of it, but we don't have the other part. We can't take any action until we have everything. And in the meanwhile, the health insurance company has been notified that that individual has died. And so they terminate the health insurance. And that puts more stress on those survivors too. So, you know, ideally, we don't want to see that happen. At this point, then we would create the death claim. Our customer service representatives will create that death claim by doing entry in the system, enter some data into the computer system. And this action will give the claim a CSF number. Forms and labels get generated. And what we call it a run by date or a cut date. So that information will get a CSF number, a claim number, and then we know what everything is there. Okay. Forms and labels get generated and they're picked up by another customer service representative. They get delivered to a support services area. Then that information is all searched in our files, and they try to find any additional records or any documentation that may be out in files for any previous service. These deceased employees may have had prior service, or there could be those CSI folders for the people that were in 365 days on pay status. And then all the information that's found for that person is assembled in the case file in a specific order. for that person. The assembled cases are then returned to survivor processing by an internal courier we have. An individual just moves from section to section and delivers work back and forth through the departments. Our customer service representatives take the cases from the run and associate it with the information we received to create the case. And at that time, then the death in service cases are separated from the rest of the run that we have, and they get logged to our 600,008 file. Once the death in service cases are logged to the 6008 file, then our customer service specialists then separate the quick pay from the package notifications. The quick pays are screened for entering interim pay, and if complete, the survivors put into interim pay. And note if the quick pay form is missing information, you won't be notified. And some of the red flags for cases not to go into interim pay: less than 10 years of service, part-time, intermittent, offsets, divorced, marriage not 9 months long, OWCP or homicide. That might not be an inclusive list, but after interim pay, the quick pay cases would be put on the shelf for cases where we don't have an application. And the cases without quick pay are put on the shelf according to the date the package was received. They are not placed into interim pay. Cases with no application have a type status that's called Death No App. Our tracking system has a field that we can put information in the system on, so we would put Death No App in there. And that way, anybody that looks in the system would be able to see that. These cases are given a 60-day follow-up for the application to be received. If the case is not in interim pay after 60 days, it is dismissed. If the case is in interim pay and no application is received after 60 days, then it's given to an LAS to try to get the application. In other words, one of our legal administrative specialists would try to contact the survivor or the agency or whatever source we needed to try to get whatever information we needed to be able to finalize that case before we would just dismiss that case. We would do everything we could to try to get the information. Once the application is received, the type status is changed to the type of payment it will be, either a deceased employee survivor or a lump sum. We also update the aging date to reflect the date the application was received. This is the order the cases are finalized. We have a hyper show on our website that shows what our processing times are, and to accurately report those, when we receive the application, we update the aging date on our system, because until we truly have that application, we can't even act upon that case. So if we had a case for 25 days, but we did not have the application, we can't finalize that case. So as soon as we receive the application, we change that aging date, because that's the only way for us to accurately report how many days it takes us to finalize that case once we have everything we need to be able to finalize that case. So that's when the clock would start for our aging date, for our timeliness. Also, time permitting, we have a customer service specialist that would also develop for certain documentation, maybe a death certificate, a marriage certificate, birth certificates, divorce decrees, property settlements, things that they would develop to try to get that information while the case is has not been assigned to anyone while they're still working on claims that are older than those ones on the shelf. Development-wise, claims are assigned by management to the legal administrative specialists. So once those cases are assigned, which are by aging date, then they would screen the cases to make sure all the documentation is there. If not, they would have to develop for the information that's needed, and that does delay the finalization of those claims. So again, ideally, it's best to have everything we need as soon as possible, so that we're not making the survivors wait any longer than they have to get the benefits that they need. With respect to court orders, when there's a divorce during federal employment, we need the divorce decree and the marital and/or property settlement agreement. We do have a paralegal specialist in survivor claims that does those for us, that does the review on those and makes the determination. So whenever we have a case that does have a divorce decree and a property settlement, first if we have that, we have a determination done by our paralegal. If not, then we request that information, and then we have our paralegal do that determination. Then the case comes back to the legal ad specialist, and then we process as the paralegal advises us based upon the divorce decree and property settlement. And so once we have everything that we need, we've developed for everything that we need, whether it be from the survivor, the agency, payroll, NPRC, the survivor benefit pay office, wherever it might be, we've done all the development we need. Then we can go ahead and do our calculation, finalize those survivor benefits. The case will go through a review process by another specialist to make sure all the calculations are correct. The case will get activated, go through, usually through a nightly cycle. Sometimes it might take a 2-night cycle. But then at that point, then the surviving spouse would receive a statement that notifies them that the basic employee death benefit, or what we call the BEDB, was paid. If it was paid out in a lump sum. If there's a survivor benefit, then there's a booklet that's called Your Federal Retirement, or Your Federal Survivor Benefits, that explains their monthly survivor benefit that would come out, and that's computer generated, so that comes out on its own. Usually within a couple weeks after the case has been finalized. And as those cases are completed, then we don't hold them in our section. We have file areas. So active cases, or cases that may have a recurring payment in the future, such as a child benefit, those get stored in our open files. So that means that there's either a monthly payment going out, or there could be a potential payment in the future. So those are going to stay open. On the opposite side of things, when there's a case where all payments have been issued and nothing else is payable, then those get stored in what's called our closed file. So there's nothing else that's payable now or in the future. Everything's paid out. There's nothing else to pay. So those are considered closed file cases. So in conclusion, we kind of talked today about the Benefits Administration Letter 19105, about getting there through opm.gov/retire. Talked about some eligibility requirements, those RI forms and the proofs. And at this point, I think we're pretty much ready for some questions. So that ends the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? If you'd prefer chatting with your questions, we can do that too. Amanda's here also. She does this on a daily basis. So.
This is Gloria from Louisiana. I have a question, please. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I got employed just on July 9th, and I did the quick service pay on OPM's website. Do we still need to send a copy of that printed form where we did that along with the packet?
Okay, so there was a little bit of interference there, but so you're saying that you did the internet submission, and you're asking if you need to also submit the form.
Right, the printed form.
Right. No, you would not need to do both.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question, please. This employee that died was married 3 times before his current spouse.
Okay.
In the property settlements, nobody's left anything. They just got divorced. Then when they had just a divorce decree. So y'all still need those?
Just divorced and there was no property settlement?
Correct.
Okay. So, all right. So we were just discussing that. If the property settlement is mentioned specifically in the divorce decree, then we would need it. If it's not specifically mentioned, then we should be okay without it.
Okay.
What I would say is that's something that our paralegal will, if we need something and we don't have it, she's going to tell us we need it, and she's going to either send a letter out and develop for it, or she's going to tell us to develop for it.
Okay. Because the divorces, but I was told in all the other trainings that it would take a year. It automatically held it up a year, so that's why I didn't want to send them if we didn't need them.
Well, no, I don't want to say that it would take a year.
Because she's disabled, and she really needs everything.
Right. I know we need a court-certified copy, but it shouldn't. I don't know that it would take a year for us to be able to process court-ordered benefits.
Okay. I mean, he had a designation on file, a current designation for her.
Well, a designation would be for a lump sum payment, not necessarily for a survivor annuity.
Okay. Okay, I see where you're coming from. Okay, I'll just put them in the portal and ask them to attach it to the package. And through the NFC portal and ask them to attach it to the package.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to have Amanda add to that, okay? I'm going to mute myself so she can.
In regard to the divorce decree, if there is not a property settlement explicitly mentioned in there may not be one. Not every divorce decree is going to have the property settlement agreement. So if it's not mentioned, you don't send it. If you have a copy of a certified copy, you can send that along. Your other question, if you don't have the divorce decree at the time of the package and they're telling you they can't get it, don't hold up sending the over to us. We could we could request that information from them directly, and they could send it directly to us to avoid having to send it to you, and then you have to send it to us.
I think I got most of that. There's a lot of background noise. Okay, so if she only gave me a copy of them, it's not a certified copy, then y'all can just request them directly from her, correct? I've already sent the packet.
Say that one more time.
I've already submitted the package
Okay.
last week because it took me a while to get the papers from her.
Okay.
I submitted the package, but I left out the divorce decrees because there's still property settlement mentioned.
So what's going to happen with that is if you've already sent it to our office, we're going to request it from the server. If she says that she's already sent it over to you, we're going to reach out to you and ask you to send us that if you haven't already. If she hasn't sent it to you, we're just going to tell her to send it directly to us.
She didn't give me certified copies. She only gave me copies. She kept the original. She kept the original certified copies.
Okay, then we will go back and ask her for them.
Okay.
You send us what if you try to get the information from the survivor, and she's telling you it's going to be an excessive amount of time. Send what you can to our office. That way we can start of getting the benefits. And if there's something else that we need at that point, then we would have to reach out to her, to the survivor.
Okay.
For her to have it all to us, if she's telling you it's going to take her an excessive amount of time to get that to you, or hasn't sent you the original copy, the certified copy, send what you have to our office, and then we can reach out to her. That just may hang it up a little bit longer. Whereas if she sent it all to you, it would process quicker through.
Okay, thank you. But see, some of the benefits conferences, anytime they get a divorce decree, it automatically takes a year in legal.
At our office?
Mm-hmm. One of the benefits conferences that I attended. That's one reason I didn't send them, just to keep it from getting hung up on lady. I guess that's my concern.
Are you saying when a case comes to OPM, it's 1 year for us to make a determination for the court order?
Right. That's what I was told. It could take up to a year in legal before anything's done.
Our divorce decrees are now processed right in our office. They are generally about 30 to 60 days, depending on the volume.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel much better.
Right. I'm not sure where that year number came from, but since I was a year after review.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better for her.
Okay. I'm trying to answer the chat questions. They're coming in faster than I can answer them. But if somebody else,
thank you.
Okay, so a question was raised earlier asking about if there is a way that we can determine if there is a CSRS designation on a field for a person. And generally, we always advise before that the best advice was always to complete a new designation. I'm not sure what that was. Let's just hold on a minute. I'll gladly respond to that. Just give me one moment here. Okay. So we can have a search done of our files to find out if there's a designation in file for that. Generally, we don't advise people of the designations, but that's a correspondence function, so I can't say for sure what they do now. But we used, at least when I was in the calls, we would more encourage people to fill out new designations. But I would assume if someone forced it issue and they asked for it, they would probably get that information. So that would probably be a call to our number 888-767-6738.
So that was my question.
Okay.
And it's that the person died and there's no surviving spouse.
Okay.
So I don't even know if there's a beneficiary form on file. It's not that I want to know who's on it, but
Right.
I just want to be able to advise the family for filling out forms. I wanted to know if there is a form on file.
Right. And I would say, yeah, go ahead and, well, have we been notified of the death yet?
No, unfortunately, my employees don't normally, their family, it'll take them months, many months to turn the paperwork back in.
Okay. So well, I was just wondering that because if we already had a CSF number cut, that designation would probably already be in our department. So no, we would need to do a physical search of files.
Okay, so there's no like list. You all don't have like a list that says yay or nay that if there's a beneficiary form on file for an active employee for when they die, and then we don't know.
No, actually those are physical documents that we don't have them imaged usually. There might be some that are imaged, but mostly those are hard copy records that are in our file area. I'm going to say mid 2000s is when imaging started, so it could be that they are that way. Maybe get in touch with me later, and I can check on that for you. Okay.
Okay, and I have another question. If we have employees that have not worked for years, okay, multiple years,
Yes.
and they're still on the rolls, they are not OWCP, and there is no LWOP action. Is that family or survivors entitled to death benefit because the person hasn't been separated or LWOP action or anything done?
Okay, so the person was left on the agency rolls all this time?
Correct.
Okay.
They last worked like 2017 or 2018.
They've been left on the agency rolls as a worker. They've been left on the rolls since, say, 2017. Former employee, but been kept on the rolls. Well, that's what I'm thinking. Yes, if the person was never separated, that person would still be on the agency's rolls, and it's probably considered a death of employee.
That's what I figured.
Right. I'm sorry, but Amanda and I were discussing this all too.
Okay, and I have one last question. You indicated on the FEHB slide there was grandchildren listed, and I thought a grandchild had to meet the requirements of a foster child in order to be covered.
They do.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And if you want to shoot me an email later about that, I'll see what I can find for Desi-wise for that, or designation-wise for that person.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure. L. Pickering, could you please mute your phone for us? Thank you.
Can you go through the chat and answer the questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Can you go through the chat questions and answer?
Can we go through the chat questions and answers? Okay. Amanda's trying to address them all, but they came through faster than. What question is yours?
None in particular. There's a lot of questions I would like to have answered.
Okay. So let's see if I can go back through here. Okay, so one question we had was, if the spouse wants to make the military deposit, do we hold up the package until it's paid? If yes, is there a timeline on how long we can hold the package? You should not hold up, the answer that Amanda gave was, you should not hold up the death package for the military deposit. We can get the benefits started and do an adjustment once we receive military deposit. Okay? And I'm assuming that's what you would like, right? You'd like me to repeat the questions that have already been addressed and answered in the chat. Is that correct?
I would like the questions answered that have not been addressed.
Oh, well, she's in the process of that. I thought you wanted somebody to read out the ones that have been answered. Okay.
What is the for the death benefit to follow up on the status of the death claim?
Okay, could you repeat that, Denise?
What is a good contact number for the death benefit to follow up on the status of a death claim?
Okay, a good phone number to follow up on?
Yes.
Status of a claim. Okay. Well, our toll-free number, 888-767-6738. All the agents that answer that line has a listing of all of our hold file listings with a description of what each type is. And they also can see who has the case, and when we put a hold action in, we put hold action whenever we're waiting for something. So they can see all of that, and they should be able to advise you of any of that. Additionally, if say I sent an email out to you for information, and you wanted to check the status of a case where I had sent something to you because I needed a 50, you could just follow up with me directly, because I'm the one that had requested the information from you. But otherwise, I would probably say that the toll-free number probably is the best way to get in touch to find the status of a case.
Hi, this is Melissa. I had a question about an employee who passed away a couple years ago. His spouse did not do anything with his military buyback, but she's currently requesting to try to buy it back now. And there was confusion whether she could still do that 2 years after the death. And I know you stated you guys can process and pay her out, but how long before something would you be allowed to do that?
Well, I know there's the administrative error. Boy, that's the question. I don't know how long it is. Was there any type of administrative error that occurred when she was provided the opportunity to pay it or to make the election as to whether or not it would increase her benefit or anything like that? Was there any type of agency error?
No, she just forgot about that because she did move away and that paperwork got put aside, and it just crossed her mind when she came across the box recently.
Okay. Well, what I can tell you is if a payroll record comes in showing that she's paid that military deposit, we're going to recalculate her benefit and we're going to pay her any additional money. You know, so if the agency allows her to pay it, we're going to recalculate her benefit and give her the additional money if the agency permits the payment.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. I'm sending everyone our toll-free number for our call center. I'm putting it in the chat. That again was 888-767-6738. Okay, so there was a question that was in the chat that was Jay Powell's, and it was about a person that never applied for benefits from a former spouse. Can we address that question instead of through chat, just answer it this way? Would you like to repeat that question orally so that we can address it this way? That would give Amanda a little time to catch up.
Okay. It's two very federal employees, okay. And one passed away, and the surviving spouse who still works at our agency never applied for his benefits. And so we try to assist her. Where would you start the application process? I don't know what the former agency is still there or whether they should go directly to OPM.
Okay. So has OPM been notified at all?
I don't know what the agency accomplished on their side. It was.
Okay. Yeah. So first thing I would say is call the toll-free number that I put in the chat and report the death first that way, because when we enter the Social Security number in the system that way, it'll bring up the CSA number or a CSF number. So, that way, there could be a retiree, or it could be just a separated employee. It could be that we already have a CSF number assigned to that person. So, that'll already tell us if we know what that person was already, that death was already reported to us. So that would be the first step. And if not, then they can take the death notice from you and if the person was a former employee and not a retiree or anything like that, then they'll forward information over to survivor claims, and then we will have to do a manual death notice ourselves, and that will start the process of doing that death drop. And what's hard is if we don't know if even that other agency even exists. If they don't exist, then that means that their payroll information should have came to us already.
Okay.
So, you know, I think we probably should have something either imaged or in our hard files. We should have something.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's hard to say, too. It could be that somebody already applied and we may have already paid benefits. You know, it's hard to, I don't like surprises when it comes to work because I'm used to opening up the case and seeing what happened or what's going to happen. And, you know, it's really hard when you're talking about what ifs and you don't have that right in front of you. So
right.
I'd love to have that and just be able to say, let me look this up and tell you what's going on exactly, or let me go pull that right now, but I can't do that right now. So, you know, the best thing would be to contact the call center, our retirement information office. And you said you had 2 federal employees that way? Or 2 federal employees?
They were married.
Okay. And they've both passed away. Okay. Are there any additional questions that Amanda hasn't answered in the chat area? Well, other than the one that she just got right now.
One more question, please. This is Gloria. Do I send the copies of those divorces directly to y'all, to OPM, or do I send them to NFC and ask them to attach it to the package?
Okay, Amanda's actually addressing that right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, this is Denise at the FAA. I have a quick question that one of my specialists actually just brought to me.
Okay.
They have a death in service right now where the employee paid life insurance while at DOD. They canceled their life insurance in 98, made an election with the open season in 99, and it became effective in 2000. At the same time that they made the election, they submitted a beneficiary form. So the beneficiary form was on file in 99, but they did not have life insurance. The employee since then has transferred to the FAA and has not updated the beneficiary forms. The question is, was that a valid beneficiary form? Because at the time that he completed it, he did not have life insurance. And is it valid now that And I have been looking online while you've been talking, and I can't find anything.
Yeah. Well, because this is a death of an employee, and we would not have any involvement with the life insurance on this, I would say that OFEGLI needs to be the one to address this.
Okay. And that's kind of where I thought, but we have to send the forms out to the family, and it's an ex-wife that gets it. not the current one.
I would probably just call OFEGLI if you have a do you have a liaison for OFEGLI.
I'm sure we do.
Okay. Yeah, I would probably call them. Otherwise, I believe their number is 1-800-633-4542, I believe.
Yes.
And
yes.
And let them know that this person died while still employed, and they filed a designation in '99, but they were not enrolled in coverage until 2000. And
okay.
ask them if that's a valid designation, because they were not officially hired until after that point. And see what they say. I don't want to say yes or no on that one, because they technically weren't an employee. So.
Well, no, they were actually an employee. They just were with DOD.
Right.
And then transferred over to us. But my thing was is that they just didn't have life insurance at that time.
Right. Right. That's what I meant, that there was no coverage. But when I said they weren't an employee, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, this is Valerie, Mr. Parks.
Hi.
We're NFC is our payroll office, and we can upload scanned documents to them now. But when I see the death certificate, it came void all over the death certificate scan. Is that acceptable?
Can we read the information?
Yes.
I would say we'll be okay. We can accept a photocopy.
Okay, great. Thank you.
However, OFEGLI will not. They require, I mean, I know that's not our area, but OFEGLI requires a certified copy.
Yes, we're still mailing documents to them, so great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is a divorce decree settlement required for a divorce that occurred prior to the employee joining federal service?
Under FERS, no. Under SERS, we have that 1985 date, at May 7 of 85. Okay, are there any other chat questions that Amanda hasn't addressed? Have you asked a question that hasn't been addressed? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. And as I said before, my name's Tim Parks. Well, it's Timothy. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. It's timothy.parks@opm.gov. I'll be glad to answer anything I can. So if you need me, just shoot me an email. I'll see whatever I can do to either get you the answers that you need, or try to do whatever. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you much. Take care.